This video was made possible thanks to the support from my patrons. Pledge today and you can be involved in what videos get made next, and also get early access to them. Link in the description. To audiences, Galaxy 4 was viewed as the start of the new season of Doctor Who after taking a 6-week break off the airwaves. More adventures throughout time and space with the enigmatic Doctor and his companions Vicky and newcomer Steven. However, internally, Galaxy 4 represents the end of an era. You see, despite the broadcast gap, the production of this serial took place immediately after The Time Meddler, with this story and the follow-up episode, Mission to the Unknown, being the end of the show's second production block, and the end of producer Verity Lambert's tenure on the show. While she was credited as producer for Galaxy 4 and Mission to the Unknown, by this point she'd more or less handed most responsibilities over to her successor, John Wiles. We also had the new script editor, Donald Tosh, on board. However, it was his predecessor, Dennis Spooner, who commissioned this serial. Writer William Ems was a schoolteacher and a big fan of Doctor Who happened to meet Spooner and pitched him a story about subverting visual expectations for the audience, with a twist where the ugly creatures were the good guys and the beautiful ones were the bad guys, instilling a lesson of don't judge a book by its cover to the younger audience. However, it seems that Verity Lambert and the higher-ups at the BBC didn't get this message, because in late June 1965, they organised a photo call outside of Ealing Studios with the beautiful women who were playing the villainous Dravins, letting the newspapers know that these were upcoming villains. "Girls Chase Doctor Who," reads the headline from the Daily Express, with Verity Lambert giving the quote, "It makes quite a change to have beautiful girls as Doctor Who's enemy." This wasn't the only gendered issue that William Ems had with developing Galaxy 4, apart from the Dravins being portrayed as male in the original script, and it was Verity Lambert's idea to swap the genders. When Ems was commissioned, the TARDIS team comprised of Vicky, Ian and Barbara, but the latter two had since moved on, meaning that major retooling was needed by Donald Tosh. The result? Most of Barbara's lines were given to Steven with very little adjustment, but more on that later. Now, Galaxy 4 is a story where most of the footage is missing. All of the episodes were junked by the BBC in the late 1960s, however it was sold overseas, and while most of the prints were returned for junking, Part 3 was kept by a private collector in Australia and returned in 2011. Singapore's copy of the episodes are also unaccounted for. Now, while the original videotapes were wiped, BBC Enterprises would often retain 16mm film prints for a longer period, and some of this footage was used in a documentary in 1977 called Who's Doctor Who, which was created with the help of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society, who asked for leftover film prints once work on the documentary was completed, resulting in several minutes of Part 1 surviving. Plus, there's also some 8mm off-air recordings as well. As a result of Galaxy 4's mostly missing status, for this video I watched the animated recreation from 2021 from Big Finish Creative. I watched the Telesnap version as well, but for this video I'll mainly be playing footage from this animated version. Anyway, let's dive into Galaxy 4. Actually, sorry, before we dive into Galaxy 4, since we're at the start of a brand new series of Classic Who, I wanted to take a moment to, firstly, thank you for watching this video, but secondly, to plug my Patreon. Now, these videos take a long time to put together, from the researching, the writing, the recording, the editing, everything. These videos, and this whole YouTube channel in general, is possible because of the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. I've recently revamped the Patreon page, so if you enjoy these videos and you want to get more out of them, then please consider supporting me there, where you can get perks like early access, sometimes months in advance, your name in the credits, access to a Mr. TARDIS Discord server, and more. I'm also going to start doing patron-only polls regarding future video topics. Do you want me to talk about Stephen Moffat's first draft of Blink, or do a video on the unit dating controversy, the history of Susan Foreman, or the history of the Cybermen? You folks can choose. My patrons will help me to decide these things, so I can create more videos based on things that you want to see. And if you can't support me on Patreon, that's absolutely fine. These videos will always be free to view on YouTube, but you can still support me by leaving any comment down below, hitting the like button and sharing these videos around, and don't forget to subscribe as well. Anyway, let's get our chumblies moving and get to the review. So, the Doctor, along with companions Vicky and Steven, land on an unnamed planet that's unusually quiet and pretty much devoid of life, except for a couple of strange small robots with offensive capabilities. Whilst being escorted to parts unknown, the trio are rescued by a couple of Dravins, and are taken by their leader, Marga, played by Stephanie Bidmead. The robots, which Vicky calls Chumblies, we'll get back to that in a minute, they belong to the Rills, who Marga claims shot down their ship before they retaliated. Now, the Dravins and the Rills are stuck on this world, which is due to explode in 14 Dawn's time, and the Dravins want to steal the Rill ship before that happens. However, the Doctor, through the use of his TARDIS, discovers that the planet is much closer to destruction than initially thought, and it's a race against time for the group to figure out who to ally themselves with and get back to the TARDIS before the world vanishes. So Galaxy 4 is a story that I'm a bit inclined to go easy on. It's pretty basic in its structure and its morals are rather simple, but I think the script by William Emms is aiming at a younger demographic. Emms was a school teacher after all, and Doctor Who is a good vehicle to instill positive life lessons and morals. Not every serial can or should be like The Crusade or The Aztecs. Variety is the spice of life, and the show's ability to target different audiences through different means of storytelling is one of the reasons why it's lasted so long. The idea that it's actually the ugly Rills that are the intelligent, kind and sophisticated species, as opposed to the beautiful but warmongering Dravins, might have worked as an effective twist had the BBC publicity department not spoiled the surprise months beforehand. But even with that publicity, I think that Galaxy 4 plays its hand significantly too early, and as a result of this, Galaxy 4 doesn't really distinguish itself from prior stories. You see, Galaxy 4 has a similar structure to something like Terry Nation's The Daleks, where our heroes quickly find themselves in the company of the villains. One of them is sent out for reasons and makes contact with the kinder, more pacifist race. Now, in The Daleks, it's obvious from the beginning that the Daleks are the villains, and the subversion is that the Daleks were mutated due to a nuclear war, and they consider the Thals to be hideous monsters as well.
Most of them perished in the war, but we know that there are survivors. They must be disgustingly mutated.
And then Susan goes out and meets a Thal, and they're conventionally beautiful.
But they call you mutations.
If they call us mutations, what must they be like?
It's a really effective way to keep the audience on their toes, and it's such a great character-defining moment for the Daleks. But in Galaxy 4, our heroes quickly encounter the villains, and then the Doctor and Vicky are sent on a mission where they meet the Rills, who are indeed ugly, but they're not savages. I can see what the story is trying to go for, but the Dravins are pretty obviously the bad guys from the start. Well, let's be honest here, Marga is the bad guy who lords her superiority over the cultivated lifeform Dravins who she keeps company with. One of the first things we see Marga do is verbally lay into one of the Dravins. She's condescending, war-hungry, and by part 2, she's trying to choke out Steven. There's no twist or subversion going on here, other than, yeah, beautiful women can be bad as well. And, well, that's not an incorrect lesson. It seems less effective than it thinks it is. Heck, we've already seen this gender subversion in Doctor Who before. In The Keys of Marinus, another Terry Nation script, we met Carla, played by Fiona Walker, who used and manipulated those around her by appearing to be a vulnerable and weak woman. Now, obviously, just because The Keys of Marinus did this in one of its half a dozen subplots, doesn't mean that Galaxy 4 can't commit a four-parter to this dynamic, but honestly, because Marga is so obviously evil from the start, and the serial commits so hard to depicting the Chumblies, an extension of the Rills, as cute and friendly, then it means there's no actual subversion taking place here on a textual level. It's just the Doctor and friends being kidnapped by the villains, finding allies nearby, and teaming up with them to win the day. But yeah, let's talk about the Chumblies. After the runaway success of the Daleks, the production team endeavoured to create aliens that would have a similar level of merchandising potential. However, despite hopefuls like the Sensorites, the Zarbi, the Menoptera, and the Mechanoids, this quickly failed. After back-to-back misses, the team decided that the Chumblies, as well as the weapons used by the Dravins, would be the last-ditch effort to pitch to toy manufacturers, but once again, they didn't bite. The Chumblies in this story are small robots operated by actors with dwarfism, and their official names are never given in the serial. Vicky spots one early on and gives it the name Chumbly because...
Oh, look, it's got a sort of Chumbly movement.
Chumbly?
Yes, you know, a sort of Chumbly.
That's not a word.
And then everyone in the story just goes along with this term. Even the Rills, who built and own the machines, they start calling them Chumblies.
Who is talking? Is it this Chumbly? Or is it someone else?
You call the machines Chumblies?
Yes.
The Chumblies have a speaker in them. They are transmitting our thoughts.
And Vicky keeps dropping the word into conversation at every opportunity.
I have to hear the report first.
Oh, naturally.
It is necessary when you are at war.
At war?
With the Rills and their machines.
Chumblies.
Vicky, stop trying to make Chumblies happen. It's not going to happen. Putting aside the dubious origins of the name, the Chumblies are pretty endearing as they wobble around making cute noises. I was lucky enough to attend the BFI screening of the animated recreation of Galaxy 4, and the amount of audible reactions to the Chumblies was off the scale. When one died at the end, the whole audience gasped. They reacted to it. It was great. Anyway, the Chumblies have great offensive capabilities, but they're no match for the force field around the Doctor's TARDIS.
Look, you see? There we go. Look away into the distance. Empty-handed. Has he given up? Yes.
I love how happy the Doctor is that his ship survived the Chumbly attack. He's so proud and giddy. I've not talked about this much in these reviews, but it's clear that the Doctor has such admiration for his TARDIS, even though he can't properly control it, especially when he compares it to the Draven ship.
They tried to blow us up inside the TARDIS.
Didn't succeed.
Well, of course they didn't. My ship's not made of tin like this old trash. Oh, good gracious me. Seemed if I coughed too loudly, the whole thing would fall to pieces.
But the Doctor doesn't disparage the Draven ship just to get cheap shots at them, mostly. It emphasises the relatively fragile nature of their vessel and leads the Doctor to ask the question, if the Rills are so evil, why don't they just destroy the ship since the Chumblies clearly have the firepower to do it? It's clever contextual clues which lead the audience down the same route as the characters. Can Marga be trusted? Now this would work really well if Marga wasn't so obviously evil so early on. Marga explains that while all of the Dravens on this mission are female, there are a few males on their world.
There are too many of us on Drava.
All women?
Women?
Yes, feminine, female.
Oh, we have a small number of men, as many as we need. The rest we kill. They consume valuable food and fulfill no particular function.
And in part 2, we learn that the Draven clones just eat vitamin tablets, and Marga's diet consists of sticks and leaves.
This is the future that liberals want.
Like I said, I think Galaxy 4 plays its hand too early from both the script perspective and the performances, with Stephanie Bidmead really diving into this role and hitting home Marga being a selfish and egotistical person. And you know what? This performance is brilliant. Yeah, I think it goes against what the story was trying to convey, but I almost don't care, because Bidmead is such a compelling presence. You can't take your eyes off her, as she owns the screen. In the 1950s, she was part of the Royal Shakespeare Company and had moved on to prestige TV in the 1960s, so you'd think that a pulp sci-fi story for children would be below her, but if she did feel that way, she doesn't let it on. She commits to the bit. Her performance in part 3, the only full surviving episode, goes so hard, and she gets a full-blown monologue to the camera where she gloats about her superiority to the Draven clones, culminating in her expressing that due to her intelligence and imagination, she can relish in the death of the Rills. She believes that her capacity for cruelty, for vindictiveness, is what makes her superior.
It may be better for us to escape in the Rills spaceship and leave them here. And then, when we are out in space, we can look back. We will see a vast, white, exploding planet, and know that they have died with it.
But we will not see them die.
You will not. But I at least have enough intelligence to imagine it. The fear, Horror. The shuddering of a planet in its last moments of life. And then they die.
My god, I'm so glad that this is the episode out of all of them that still survives so we can watch this performance. The animation is good, but being able to see the actual speech in live action is enthralling. Even Steven's amazed. I love that shot of him breaking character as Steven is meant to be pretending to be asleep. In fact, let's talk about Steven. Like we mentioned up top, William Ems wrote Galaxy 4 when Ian and Barbara were still companions, and due to the changing of the lead cast, he wound up inheriting Barbara's lines. This would result in Peter Purves having full-blown arguments with the producers and the director because he felt like his character was not coming through and that he was being feminized due to having to speak Barbara's dialogue. Now, I'm not trying to discredit Peter Purves' objections. He was there. He would know better than me, obviously. I wasn't even born yet. Heck, my parents had only just been born around this time. But I do think that Steven comes across as pretty in character in this story. I mean, after just being introduced in The Chase and in The Time Meddler, this is only his second full story. Steven's character hadn't really been fully fleshed out yet. I also think it's clear that he didn't just inherit Barbara's lines, he inherited Ian's. This would explain his enjoyment at meeting the Dravins for the first time.
Who are they?
No idea, but aren't they a lovely surprise?
We are the Dravin.
And very nice, too.
I can't imagine Barbara saying that, or at least I can't imagine her delivering that line in that way. We've got Steven trying to wrestle the gun out of Marga's hand and getting overpowered in part 2, then trying to single-handedly overpower the Dravins and escape in part 3. I don't think these really read as things Barbara would have done, to me at least. I reckon that originally it was Ian who went to the TARDIS with the Doctor at the end of part 1, leaving Vicky and Barbara with Marga on her ship. So far, so in character. Peter Purves' objections mainly stemmed from letting himself get caught in the airlock at the end of part 3. He manages to get his hands on a Dravin weapon and he reaches the airlock, however there's a Chumbly outside and Steven has no idea that they're friendly, so he's seemingly trapped between two enemies, so Marga starts to remove the oxygen from the chamber. Honestly, this fits Steven's character so far. He's impulsive, he's sometimes in way over his head. Him getting trapped in this situation, it feels organic to the story and to the character. I really don't know why Peter Purves had such objections to it, other than maybe he just didn't want his character to get trapped as a point of principle. But I still think that Steven gets some really good moments in this serial anyway. I like the conversation between him and Marga, where she tries to convince him to take her away in the TARDIS before the planet can explode, but Steven can see right through the manipulation.
You could easily escape from this planet.
Oh, could I?
In your own ship?
Oh, taking you with me, of course.
Well, you wouldn't expect us to stay behind.
No, I suppose not.
All you have to do is to take us off this planet, and you are free.
Just like that?
It's a fair offer.
Oh, yes. Yes, but even assuming I believed you, that on the way you didn't decide I was eating too much food, there is a snag.
What's that?
I can't operate it. I couldn't if I tried. Only the Doctor can do that. It's his ship. Why don't you try making your offer to him? Or is it that you think he might be just a little bit too clever for you? I'm the gullible one, is that it?
And only a few scenes ago, Marga managed to pick him up by the throat and throw him on the table. He knows he's not a physical match for her, but still behaves like this. It's pretty ballsy. The only moment that doesn't make much sense to me is in part 2. Steven manages to wrestle one of the Dravin guns away from its owner, who does nothing to stop him, only for him to dust it off and then put it down on the table before asking for food. And the Dravins don't punish him for this or even acknowledge what just happened in the dialogue. It's such a short but strange scene that I thought that the animated version just added it for no reason, but it does happen in the original broadcast version according to the telesnaps. This scene is so pointless and so inconsequential that even the novelization by William Ems doesn't include it. But while we're on the subject of companions, I think this is a pretty good showing for Vicky. Yeah, she's young and naive and she instantly becomes enamored with the Chumbleys, but she still has some great interactions with the Doctor, and it's mainly her who needs to overcome her prejudices when she encounters the Rills and she's immediately afraid of them. Plus, there's this hilarious delivery when she throws a rock at one of the Chumbleys.
First, we must observe, note, collate, and then conclude. After that, perhaps we can act. Hmm? What are you doing?
The answer, Doctor, I thought it
My
might
dear
be...
child, you'll get us killed.
Didn't you see? They only pick up sounds in front of them. If we keep immediately behind them, they won't know we're there.
Yes, you may appear to be right, but it's dangerous and it's very risky.
That was no risk. I noted, observed, collated, concluded, and then I threw the rock.
Oh, yes, quite so, yes. Have you now finished?
So let's finally talk about the Rills. So the Doctor and Vicky are sent to the Rill spaceship by Marga to try and either take the ship from them or find a way to do it. The Chumbleys just let the two inside, and there they encounter the Rills inside these large glass chambers, obscured by gas, and these things are adorable. They're large, waddling creatures with tusked mouths and green skin. They're meant to be horrifying, but I think they're cute. It turns out that not only are they incredibly intelligent and friendly, but that Marga has not been entirely honest with them. Her story was that the Rills shot their ship down, the Dravins returned fire, and then they both crashed on the planet, only for the Rills to kill one of the Dravins. It turns out the Dravins fired first, the Rills retaliated, and as the Rills tried to help one of the injured Dravins, Marga intervened and killed them herself. I love how this scene is framed, by the way. We get a flashback and it's a POV from the Rills' perspective. Really cool stuff. The Rills are willing to help the Dravins, but with only 2 dawns left before the planet's destruction and no power to their ship, the Doctor decides to help them by feeding them power from his TARDIS. Him and Vicky manage to rescue Stephen, the Dravins are unable to break through the Rills' defences, and the Rills manage to escape in time, with Marga and the Dravins being left behind to die on the planet. It's a pretty effective ending, especially with just how hard the story commits to the Rills being highly upstanding citizens of the universe with lengthy lifespans, and they're fully aware that their appearance is horrifying.
Tell me, what do these Rills look like?
They won't show themselves, Doctor.
Who? Why ever not?
Because our appearance would not be pleasant to you.
Oh, what nonsense. We're not children, you know.
It is best you do not see us.
Very well, carry on.
And someone who doesn't get enough credit in this story, Robert Cartland, who voices the Rills, who speak telepathically and they transmit through the Chumbley speakers. It's a strangely calming voice, but very authoritative. It shows signs of apathy at the situation that they're in, and the Rills are also very emotive and they're passionate when they discover that Stephen might be in danger, and they encourage the Doctor and Vicky to save them, even though it will distract from their own escape attempt.
What does that mean?
The Chumbley has reported that your friend is still in the ship, but he's making noises they cannot understand. He says they sound like cries of distress.
Doctor!
I'm a Scott Monster.
You cannot help him alone. We will send 2 more Chumbley machines with you.
But what can they do?
Cut open the ship if necessary.
Doctor, come.
Go, quickly. The Chumbley reports the sounds are weakening.
Such a good performance, really underrated. While the serial itself fails at delivering the moral as a twist, it does a good job at hitting home the idea of judging from appearances, that just because the Rills have no physical similarities to our heroes, that doesn't mean that they don't share the same values or they don't believe in justice.
It is easy to help others when they are so willing to help you. Though we are beings of separate planets, you from the solar system and we from another space, our ways of thought at times do not seem all that different. It has been an honor to know you and serve you.
Unfortunately, with episode 4 being a missing episode, we can't watch the planet's destruction, but the animated recreation does a good job at getting across this apocalyptic event, especially the horror on Marga's face as she falls into the lava. It's pretty grim, as is the concluding moments of the story where the Doctor, Vicky and Stephen escape the planet and land in orbit around another world, and the audience can see that someone there has been possessed by something.
Remember now. I must kill. I must kill. I must kill.
This would lead into the one-off episode Mission to the Unknown, the prequel to the upcoming 3-month epic The Daleks' Master Plan, but that's a story for another time. Let's talk about the animation. This reconstruction comes from Big Finish, and while I think it is a step down from works like The Macra Terror or The Evil of the Daleks, it's a decent animation job considering the budget and the resources. While there's a lot of shots of characters just running or walking from one side of the screen to the other, the episodes get across the vast emptiness of the landscape way better than the original. The character models seem a bit off though, but I think it's a proportion thing. I think their heads, especially Hartnell's, are just a bit too small and the arms are a bit too long. But apart from that, I did find them quite expressive, especially Marga during her Part 3 monologue. However, when you compare the original footage to the animation, you can tell that there's quite a lot lost in translation. The opening shot was a wonderful one, with this top-down camera view which glides down to show the TARDIS being piloted by the Doctor, with Vicky and Steven in the background. But in the animated version, it's just a static side-on shot with no depth to it. The group entering the Drahvin ship in Part 1 was originally shown from this camera shot, which dips below the support beams as the door closes, but we get nothing nearly as ambitious with the animation. I don't say this to disparage the animation team, I'm sure that these shots would have been really difficult to recreate, but it does make me a bit sad that other brilliant shots no longer survive because of short-sighted junking. If these moments didn't somehow survive, we'd have no idea that we were missing anything. In the animated Part 1, Marga is expositing about the nature of the Drahvin clones and she stamps her foot.
And these are not what you would call human. They are cultivated in test tubes. We have very good scientists. I am a living being.
However, that sound in the original wasn't her stamping her foot, it was Marga clapping her hands in front of a sleeping Drahvin to wake it up.
And these are not what you would call human. They are cultivated in test tubes. We have very good scientists. I am a living being.
It's a wonderful little character beat, which showcases Marga's supposed superiority, but in the animated version, it's not here. But there are some advantages to the animated format though. There is some good stuff here. The Drahvins have been sized up for the animation, to the extent where Marga towers over Steven. I love these side-on shots of the table while Marga and Vicky are sat down. Marga looks absolutely massive next to the 5'2" companion. One slightly controversial choice was to make the Drahvin clones look identical to each other. Now in the original, the Drahvins were played by 3 different actresses. You got Marina Martin, Susanna Carroll and Lynn Ashley. And they're meant to look similar. They are clones after all, they're cultivated life forms. So it makes sense for the animated version to commit to that look and to make them look identical. I'm sure it was also a lot easier to animate. Is it a bit disappointing that we don't get 3 different animated Drahvins to reflect the appearance of Marina, Susanna and Lynn? Yeah, but I also kind of get why they did it. It depends on your tolerance for these things. Sometimes the animation can actually salvage proper mistakes in the episode itself. For example, one definite improvement for the animated version is it depicts the contrast between the Drahvin and the Rill ships, with one being small and rusting away compared to the vast and colourful Rill ship. The original TV version of the Rill ship did have some interesting architecture, but that's mainly code for lots of plastic sheets and bars with equipment that is literally falling apart.
We know what this machine's for. This is to convert air into ammonia gas.
Doctor, hurry up!
Hester, have patience, child. When I finish with this machine, I'm sure they will release you.
Very cleverly though, the animated version accounts for that accidental sound by having the Doctor take a panel off deliberately. Nice touch.
Hester, have patience, child. When I finish with this machine, I'm sure they will release you.
I will say though, the only piece of set that the original has over the animated version are the bars that separate Vicky and the Doctor in Part 3. While they don't look very solid in the original, in the animated version, the gaps between the bars are so large, I'm amazed that Vicky doesn't just walk straight through them. Anyway, you can tell by those surviving camera shots that despite the low budget, the direction for Galaxy 4 was really strong thanks to Derek Martinus. The serial was meant to be directed by Doctor Who's original associate producer, Mervyn Pinfield, but he fell ill shortly after production started and had to be replaced. Martinus had just completed a BBC director's course and was slated to direct the upcoming The Mythmakers serial, but in light of the circumstances, his work was brought forward. Filming of the serial was very difficult, as Martinus was not very experienced, and filming would frequently overrun, the cameras would collide or stumble over the cables. This would cause tensions to rise. Producer John Wiles threatened to fire Hartnell during an on-set argument. Peter Purves was also frustrated over the scripts, and Maureen O'Brien came to the defense of her acting colleagues. The result was that John Wiles, in secret, would start taking steps over the next few weeks to write O'Brien out of the series as soon as possible. As for Mervyn Pinfield, the director of most of the Sensorites, most of Planet of Giants, the Space Museum, the original director of Galaxy 4, the first face in Doctor Who's title sequence during early production, Doctor Who's first associate producer, and allegedly the inventor of one of television's first auto cues, dubbed the Pinny Prompter, unfortunately his health did not recover, and he passed away just under a year later at the age of 54. Now, Galaxy 4, it's difficult to summarise because there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about and it's fun pulp sci-fi, but I'm not really convinced it entirely works. There's not much of an emotional journey for the audience due to the Dravins just being openly evil from the very beginning. The Chumbleys are cute, but that's about it. I think the performances are strong. Stephanie Bidmead almost walks away with the entire production, and from what we can see, it was directed very well, even if the behind-the-scenes production was a nightmare. I also think this is one of the weaker stories for the First Doctor, because he doesn't seem to have much rationale to do what he does. When he discovers the planet has only 2 dawns left, he initially elects to leave Vicky behind, which feels so out of character for him. Also, while I'm on the subject, why did the Rills think the planet had 14 dawns left? The TARDIS is obviously a more advanced travelling machine, but how were the Rills so wrong? And what does it change about the story other than giving us a Part 1 cliffhanger? The Doctor initially decides to keep this discovery a secret from the Dravins by saying that 14 dawns was the correct assessment, and while the reason for the deception is never explained, it kinda makes sense that the Doctor might have had a plan that never panned out. Also, the Doctor falls for the same prejudices as Vicky and Marga. He's also horrified at the sight of the Rills, and attempts to kill them by breaking the machine in their ship, which gives the Rills their breathable atmosphere. It feels so rushed. And this goes against everything else he says and he does in the serial. Before he meets the Rills, he's incredibly trusting, and later on he chastises Vicky for being scared of their appearance, even though he nearly tried to kill them because of it. And this disparity is never brought up or commented on. He's not a very good role model in this serial. Anyway, it could be worse. It could be the Doctor in the Galaxy 4 Target novelisation. Now, this was also written by William Ems, and it's interesting. While the TV version has been considered by some fans as a reactionary outlook to the evils of second-wave feminism, I wouldn't really go that far, especially how the original version of the script meant to have the Dravins as men. The idea to change the gender was Verity Lambert, but the novelisation definitely does read like a reactionary outlook on the evils of second-wave feminism, with the Doctor being openly sexist in ways that just don't happen in the TV version, like this dialogue exchange outside of the Dravin spaceship. The battered ship loomed above them, and the Doctor paused at the entry to fish out his screwdriver again. He went to the hull, and scratched through the space dirt to the body itself. He looked closely.
As I thought, Stephen, there's nothing particularly advanced about this material. It's tough, but not impregnable. A reasonably common metal with nothing special about it.
So? Stephen said.
So?
The Doctor sniffed.
So much for their female scientists.
Biased, are we? And this gem, as he yells at Vicky for being scared of the Rills. Vicky was put down. Sorry, Doctor, but I do find it very frightening.
Then don't. If you stumble through life believing that anything that doesn't look like you is necessarily bad, you'll make a very poor fist of it. A little more tolerance is what you need, and much less of this burgeoning female arrogance I seem to be encountering all the time since we landed. Claims of superiority I always find extremely boring. There's always someone better. Except in my case, of course.
Doctor, Vicky started. What the fuck? Was William Ems a raging misogynist? No idea. I'm not here to do a retroactive cancellation or anything, but it makes me wonder whether or not Stephen Moffat was adapting this version of the Doctor rather than the TV version when writing Twice Upon a Time, but that's another story. Audience reactions to the drive-ins at the time though was pretty funny. My favourite was this write-up in The Listener by Frederick Laws after the broadcast of Part 3. Doctor Who now has a race of females with spotted brows, a love of killing, and intelligence limited for military purposes. In the last instalment, one of these girls was breaking down a human being by removing oxygen from the room he was in. It will finish on the side of the angels, I am sure, but it is nightmare food, and could raise trouble among feminists as well as psychiatrists. Nearly 60 years later, very little has changed from the UK's pundit class. Galaxy 4 is fun, but it's fluff, and a bit all over the place when it comes to its writing and its messaging. But it definitely has its charm, and you know what, at 4 parts it breezes along. The Chumblies were popular with children at the time, but toy makers did not take the bait, and they never appeared in the show again, and were just relegated to background cameos and a couple of expanded universe stories. But next week it was time for Doctor Who's real merchandising icons to make a return in Mission to the Unknown, setting the stage for Doctor Who's biggest production yet. But we've already reviewed that story for Daleksember, so join us next time, as the production arguments during filming for Galaxy 4 will see their fallout as Maureen O'Brien gets written out of the show, whether she likes it or not, as the Doctor, Stephen and Vicky take part in the very real historical event of the Trojan Horse in The Myth Makers. I'll see you next time. Hey folks, thank you so much for watching this review of Galaxy 4, and I have no idea why this review was as long as it was. I apologise. I know I did most of the admin up front, so just like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And once again, I have a Patreon. You should see their names scrolling down right now. I want to give a shout out to these particular patrons: Adam Grattan, Alex Dry, Ben Langdon, Callum Baird, Chiba City Blues, Dan the Dreamer Shill, Daniel Davis, Darkstar2189, Darren Carver-Bausinger, Dean Jones, Dragon Bugs, Dylan Whitaker, Finley Rude, Flippant, Ginger Animator, Jack D. Evans, Joseph Adams, Lard Dragon Ezra, Leela, Maria Bergman, Mario Fanboy 15, Matthew Perry, Michael Serrano, Miranda Logan, Nate Harris, Palex, Pat Andrews, Randall Sprinkle, Raven Woods, Reese Lloyd, Ross, Ryan Duncan, Samuel Whitaker, The Evil Dalek, The Brit Sniper, The Doctor 14 Blu-ray Reviews, Timbo 1834, Toby Loxton, Will, and William Baker. And quick shoutouts, thank you to Palix for voicing the first Doctor in those Target novelization segments, and thank you once again to The Evil Dalek for helping me find the original music for these stories, so we can have some nice accurate ambience that sounds like some weird 1960s synth. Season 3 is going to be a bit difficult to review because so many of those stories are missing and we don't have animated reconstructions, but I hope it will be a fun journey nevertheless. It's The Myth Makers next, and I'll see you then.